Jonathan McKinstry, you coached Rwanda, as you had said, and they actually hosted the Chan, and there was a much bigger interaction between the fans because the stadiums were kind of like the right size for it. Do you compare, if you could, compare your experiences of the Chan in Rwanda and here that you've actually seen?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's important to say that I really do think the Cameroonian public have got behind the tournament here from what I've seen. Obviously, there has been restrictions due to the COVID pandemic, so only 25% allowed into the stadiums. But we've always been very impressed with each of our games at the numbers in the stadium and the atmosphere they've tried to create. Because coming into the tournament, you're never sure. Big stadiums, you know, if only a few thousand people turn up, it can feel a bit soulless. You know, and I think you have seen this in other Chan tournaments where, you know, stadiums, maybe you do have 5,000 or 6,000 people in them, but if it's a 50,000 seater stadium, that gets lost in the size of it. In Rwanda in 2016, only the national stadium was really in excess of 35,000. The other stadiums were, I think one of them was a 7,000 seater, another one maybe around 8, 9, and the third sort of 11, 12,000. And what that meant was you were getting the same crowd numbers of 5, 6, 7,000 people, but in those stadiums, they're full. There's no seats available, and the atmosphere that creates is really something special. And so I do think going forward, what I would love to see is that the Chan tournament, more often than not, can go to maybe those countries that are developing. You know, that a country that has aspirations maybe in the future to host an AFCON, but maybe that's 10, 15 years away. Whereas in the next 5 years, they could realistically get facilities in place to host a Chan. Chan is obviously a smaller competition than AFCON now, so I think AFCON you need 6 stadiums now, whereas Chan you only need 4. They obviously don't need to be as big necessarily, and I just think it would be, in terms of leaving a legacy in countries, I know in Rwanda, the facilities that were built in order to host Chan are still being used and helping to develop the game. The facilities here in Cameroon are fantastic, but they were being built anyway to host AFCON. So if Chan, when it can, goes to countries that are those middle-level countries, like imagine, say, a country like Uganda potentially hosting a Chan. You know, if we aim right now to host an AFCON, that's maybe too big a step to take right now. But if we consider hosting a Chan in the next 8 years, 10 years, then I think that's more achievable and helps move towards the improvement of facilities. So, yeah, that's what I would like to see happen.
Well, you've actually anticipated one of the questions, because I was going to ask, when do you think Uganda would host one of these big tournaments, and would you like to see them hosted?
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges in Ugandan sport, not just for football, has been facility infrastructure over the years, and it's really good now that we're starting to see clubs privately also starting to move forward, because I know KCCA, one of the leading clubs in Uganda today, just broke ground on the development of they're refurbishing the stadium. They're sort of starting from scratch a little bit, but I think they're aiming for an 11 or 12,000 seater stadium. And again, there's other clubs, Vipers, the league champions, have a 18,000 seater stadium, and if you can get another couple of clubs, either through partnership with local government or through private investors, to also build stadiums of that range between 8 and 12,000 seater, then it's within our grasp to host a tournament and all of the benefits that that would bring with it. So yeah, I think given what is already there, given the plans for development from various clubs, I would like to think in the next 8 to 10 years, Uganda would be well placed to host a tournament like Chan.
Going back to the question I was asking, with what Kalisha Bwalia was saying about having players from other countries or playing in other countries available for the Chan, One of the obvious ones, and I'm pretty sure you would have selected him if you could, is the Uganda national team captain Denis Onyango. Even if you didn't play him much, but you would have his experience and his mentorship, would that have helped if you had had Onyango available for selection?
I understand the question, but I think it has to come back to the core purpose of the tournament in terms of Chan. And look, that's not to say we selected only young players. We obviously brought Tony Mweje as part of our squad here, who is a legend of Ugandan football, now 34 years of age, having returned to Uganda to play for Police FC, but has had a fantastic career, and I think 85 international caps, helped the team qualify in 2017 to AFCON. And part of the reason we brought him, not just his quality as a player, but was also that experience. You know, you saw he didn't start every game, he played some minutes, other times he was on the substitutes bench, but part of that reason was the experience. But I think we have to be really careful at, you know, where do we draw the line? Yeah, look, would a player of Denis Onyango's experience and quality and leadership skills, you know, benefit our team? He would benefit any team because of who he is as a person and as a leader. But it's one of those things, it's like, because for every experienced, seasoned professional you bring in, you have to remove a spot for the next player in the production line. And so I think the balance would be difficult. As I said, at the moment, what you see is some teams go for young players, other teams go for experience. I think if you opened it up to selecting players from anywhere in Africa, you would probably see more teams opting to go for experienced lineups, which I think would start to go against the ethos of the tournament itself.
I don't know if you know the coach of South Sudan. He's a Cameroonian named Cyprien Ashubasong.
Yeah.
And he came here for practice matches, and it ended up as a bit of a practice for Cameroon's Chan team. And he was saying he likes the concept of the Chan, but he doesn't see why you don't have an age limit on it, because he saw that they were playing over 30s and people like that, and he was essentially saying that if you haven't broken into the full national team by then, you're really not going to. And if that's the case, it's not using the Chan in the way that it should be used in terms of trying to develop and give a chance for local based players to stake a claim to play in the national team. So he wanted to see an age cap of around 25. Do you agree with him?
Yes. I think the way I've always treated this tournament, both with Rwanda and now with Uganda, is we could take the team we brought here, 95% of it, to play in an Olympic tournament with the criteria that the Olympics set in terms of the vast majority need to be under 23, and you're allowed 3 overage players. Now we might have a 4th or a 5th overage player that we would have to change for those rules, but largely we've went with the idea of what type of team would you take to the Olympics. So young guys, under 23 primarily, with a few experienced heads to add that extra bit of quality and robustness, but also provide leadership and mentorship to those young boys. And we spoke to those senior players about that was also their role. They weren't just here as footballers, they were here as mentors as well. And so, yeah, I think I would like to see that happen. I think it would benefit the game in Africa more if the younger players were given more of an opportunity. But also, you know, bringing a senior team here and winning Chan also brings with it prize money, kudos, and a nation could also say that that benefits the growth of the game in their country. But yeah, I would agree with Cyprien that making more younger players participate in the tournament would be the way to go.
Which do you consider is more important? Winning the Chan, winning under 20 tournaments, under 17 tournaments, or developing, say, 5 players, and all 5 of them are going to be fixtures in the national team, the senior national team, for the next 10 years?
I think it's about developing players. And it's also about tournaments like this are about gaining exposure for players. Like if you said to me, you have a choice between winning Chan and none of your players leaving the Ugandan Premier League to go and play in Europe or big leagues around the world, or you can go out of Chan earlier, but 5, 6, 7 of your players get scouted to go to that next level. I think for the growth of the game, that the latter option is preferable. Players getting picked up to go and play in more competitive leagues. It's good for Ugandan football because they become more competitive. It's good for themselves because they'll probably get better contracts where they're going, so it's good for them and their families. So yeah, I think when you get to the AFCON and you get to the World Cup, it's about winning. And if you can win with a performance, if you can win well, fantastic, but it's about winning. Whereas at every category below that, whether it's Chan, the U20s, the U17s, winning is nice and it helps develop that winning habit, which is also important. But I don't think we should place that significantly ahead of developing the next layer of football and talent.
The last match you played in this Chan was against the defending champions Morocco. You were in with a shout. Then there were some decisions which people were a little bit surprised at, let's say. I mean, in particular, the Moroccan penalty, people didn't like the look of it and didn't think it was a genuine penalty. Some are still saying there was actually an infringement by the Moroccans before the penalty was given. I don't know if you think that or not. And then there was other ones at the other end where there was a strong penalty shout for Uganda, and it led to very serious dissent when the referee didn't give it. And as I asked previously, the question on this is, if you have VAR, why don't you use it? That's the first question. And the second question is, VAR itself would have prevented the dissent, because there would be no point. You would simply say to the referee, try and get them to look at it, and then, as it was a penalty shout, it probably would have been looked at anyway by the VAR. So you would have a situation where a young player would have learned to control his annoyance and not get himself booked. Now, if Uganda had gone through, that could have had serious implications. So is that another reason why VAR should actually be used in these situations? Well, that's basically.
Yeah, look, for me, there's two sides to it. I think one of them is, CAF have decided to use VAR at their major flagship competitions. AFCON, it gets used, the latter stages of the Champions League and Confederations Cup, it gets used. And obviously for Chan, the decision prior to the tournament that was communicated would be from quarterfinals onwards. So again, there is an acceptance that we want to use this technology. Because that's the first thing. Just because Europe is doing something doesn't mean Africa has to do it. Europe doesn't have a Chan tournament, but we do. Is that right or wrong for each party? No, it's what is best for Africa. And so, first of all, it's a decision of what direction are we going to go. But once we go that direction, so if the decision at the top end of African football has been, yes, we want to use VAR, then I think trying as best we can for maximum implementation is important. Now, can we have VAR in the qualifying stages of the African Cup of Nations? That is challenging because it costs a lot of money to install this system. I know what it costs in the English Premier League, and the Scottish Premier League don't have it because it costs too much money. So it's an expensive system. But so I don't expect it in qualifying, because what you have to have in one stadium, you have to have in all the stadiums to make it even and fair. But in a competition like this, where it's clearly in all 4 stadiums, because all stadiums are hosting quarterfinal games, then it seems an intriguing decision not to use it in the group stages if it's available. I don't know, I've not been able to sit down with one of the decision makers at CAF and ask them that. I would love to know the reason, because there should, if that's a decision, there's a reason for a decision. But there's no doubt it would have it might have changed one or two decisions in the game. But equally, I also think throughout the tournament, the thing about VAR is there's a lot of things that go missed. That you don't maybe see, but if someone's watching it back on camera, you see a lot more penalties get given, you see a lot more offsides get given, you see things being brought back, and so there's no doubt it would be a slightly different tournament, but yeah, it'd be interesting to know why they choose not to use it, because it would make a difference.
To go back to the point on that particular incident, you have a young player who reacts emotionally and angrily to a decision not going the way he thinks it should have gone. In this situation, if you had VAR, it would simply have gone to VAR. They would have looked at it, they would have decided, is it a penalty, yes or no? And that player wouldn't have got booked, because there would have been no point to having for his dissent at any point in this. And he would then have been available at for later stages in the competition. Is it not unfair that you're not putting the using the technology that would have assisted the referee and would have assisted the player?
For me, the first thing is the reaction of the player has to be worked on regardless of VAR. You know, I think we talk all in the game about respect for the officials, and look, people make mistakes. I make mistakes, players make mistakes, referees will make mistakes. That is the nature of being a human being. And so mistakes will happen, and I think we talk a lot to our players about, it's not just about what they do with their feet, it's about what they do with their brain, and are they thinking footballers? And are they in control of their thoughts? Are they in control of their emotions? And in that moment, you can see someone who's maybe not in control, because if you're in control, you know that you can only push things so far. So I think the first thing is about player discipline. Yes, would VAR have, but I also don't know if VAR would stop the yellow card for the player, because if you think about it, in that moment where the penalty is not given, VAR takes, before they alert the referee, it's maybe 10 or 15 seconds goes by before the referee gets a word in his ear that you need to look at that again. By the time that comment comes from the video room, the player has already probably reacted in the way of, that's a penalty, I need, you know, in that anger and that frustration moment has probably already occurred. And it is the reaction, even if it becomes a penalty through VAR, I think it doesn't matter whether the referee's right or wrong. The player still should not be so aggressive and so offensive towards a match official. So I think the yellow card might still get given, even if they come back and give the penalty. So I'm not sure it would stop the yellow card. Now, over time, would players relax more as they understand the system more to not complain so vigorously? But yeah, for me, first and foremost, it's about working with the player and controlling his thinking and controlling his reactions.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but some players from the Republic of Congo, they won AFCON, probably the most unexpected AFCON victory of all time in the Republic of Congo, i.e. Congo-Brazzaville won in 1972. Some of those players are here and have been watching and inspiring the Congolese team. Is that something you would like to see with the Ugandan team? For example, you have the 1978 team, which is probably the most legendary Ugandan team, to get some of them to come as guests of these competitions and basically be there for your players to look up to.
Yeah, I think, you know, having that inspiration from people who've been there and done it and had those experiences is never a negative. And we do try to do that back in Uganda, you know, reasonably frequently. You know, some of our boys have met some of, unfortunately there's not so many of our 1978 team still with us, unfortunately. You know, there's a number of them have passed on. But those who are still around, you know, a few of them are involved at the Federation. The goalkeeper, Paul Sully, I speak to on a regular basis. You know, I love hearing his stories from that tournament and what they had to go through for that success that they gained. And but yeah, inspiration is one of the huge factors in driving yourself forward. Because if you don't know anybody in your life or anyone you can relate to who's done it, yeah, people can look at the Cristiano Ronaldos, the Messis and stuff on the TV, but they're so far detached and removed from your own reality that you can only gain so much from them. To have someone who grew up in the same environment you did, who went through similar things that you've went through, and who's pushed forward and have gained success, I think that's really, really big. And even we've tried a little bit in this tournament. We've had video messages from the likes of Denis Onyango, from several of our players all around the world who've sent video messages and sort of conference calls with our players here to again give them some words of encouragement, guidance, and to be those mentors even from a distance. But yeah, the legends of the game, I think we should keep close to the game, because it's one of those things. They say you only really value something when it's gone, and unfortunately, I think too often that is the case. So while people are still available to inspire and to motivate, I think we should keep them close.
As a European working in Africa, how do you value African icons? For example, Godfrey Chitalu. A lot of people will know about his 1972, which is one of the greatest years ever in football. What they may not know is that he also holds the international record goal scorers for Africans, and he holds the CECAFA Cup record of 11 goals. And you mentioned him earlier, the goalkeeper Paul Sali. I spoke to him through WhatsApp about Chitalu, and he says he will never forget a match where it was the semi-final of the CECAFA Cup in 1978, and Chitalu scored all 4 goals against Uganda, knocking them out 4-0. And Sali says he'd never forget it. It was one of the big things of his career, and how big a player he was. How important are icons like Godfrey Chitalu to African football? And as a European, how do you appreciate it, the contribution he made?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. As I've got older, I've definitely appreciated more and more. I think it's fair to say that as a young, as a young, boy growing up in Ireland, that the big African footballers, maybe, yes, I knew of the likes of George Weah and Tony Yeboah, obviously was in the English Premier League at the time, but as a young person, I maybe didn't know so many. Because, again, exposure to British football in my youth, there wasn't so many African players until maybe the mid to late 90s. They really started coming into the British footballing system. But as I grew older, definitely, and one of the best moments in my early time, I mentioned, I was maybe only 20, 21 when I first came to Africa in Ghana, but I had the opportunity on that trip to meet Abedi Pele in Ghana, and that sort of, speaking with him, and obviously knowing about his sons, and just that level of player who's, again, for me, the thing that impresses me most is not necessarily the talent someone has, it's the mental strength and the fortitude they've needed to get to the level, even in spite of all the challenges they've faced in life. And I think a lot of these icons of African football, when they rise through the levels, they've had to work 10 times as hard as some of the European footballing icons, because the challenges that are laid out in front of them are so significant. Another one who's a little bit younger from my time in Sierra Leone, who I'm glad to call a friend, is Mohamed Kalwan. Mohamed's story is remarkable. Sleeping in the markets as a 10, 11-year-old boy, overnight because he had nowhere to go, and then to rise up to play for Inter Milan and be, I think, the second top goal scorer in Serie A that season. So these journeys are things that are almost unfathomable, but yet they happen. And so, yeah, they're so important to the fabric of African football, and indeed global football. And yeah, I just think the more our young players can hold those people up and follow their example, the better.
I think it's fair to say Ugandan clubs have underachieved in terms of African football tournaments, and that's also fair to say about the national team. One, why do you think that is? And two, what do you think can be done about it?
I think one of the big challenges at club level in Uganda, and we've touched on this already, is that because in Uganda maybe the salary scale is slightly lower than neighbouring countries in East Africa, you see a lot of young talented players who are maybe only 20, 21 years of age moving to a very comparable league like Kenya or Tanzania purely for financial reasons. The Kenyan league is not stronger than the Ugandan league, yet their teams perform better on the continent. Why is that? If you look at the likes of Gor Mahia or AFC Leopards, their starting 11 is a combination of the best talents of East Africa. Whereas if you look at the Vipers or KCCA lineups this year in the interclub competitions, there was only two non-Ugandans across the 4 matches. So again, there's no foreign exports really coming into Uganda. We're relying purely on Ugandan talent. But then even some of our best young talent is moving to go abroad quite early. Now, I just think that it can weaken teams because you're always needing to look for the next conveyor belt. A fantastic statistic about the Ugandan Premier League is 65% of the players are under 23. Now that's remarkable. You know, the Ugandan league is a remarkably young league. So now you can start to understand that if a team that is primarily an under 23 team all of a sudden have to play a playoff game against the likes of Pyramids or Wydad Casablanca or these teams who are coming with an average age of 27, 28 with the best players from North Africa or all over Africa indeed, then you can start to understand why, okay, that's an uphill task. But the teams, we've seen some good performances recently. KCCA got to the group stages in recent years, and we just need to keep. The more we access those group stages, the more exposure players will get, and the improved performances will come.
What would you like to see the Ugandan FA, CAF and FIFA do to help the development of Ugandan football in terms of infrastructures and also pitches, the whole works?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different grants and funding available from FIFA, from CAF, and I know it's being used. I think you've got to remember that these things are not inexpensive. They're not cheap. To build an artificial football pitch, for example, maybe costs the best part of $400,000, $350,000. So to build 1 or 2 of those in a year is a huge amount of money. And so, for example, I know right now Uganda are utilizing the FIFA funding projects, and we're currently building a training facility only 1 or 2 kilometers from the Federation headquarters. So things are happening, but I do understand that people want lots of things to happen very quickly. But that's not the way the world works. Things cost money. Money is not readily available. If FIFA are making $1 million available for the Ugandan FA, they also have to make $1 million available for all 211 FAs. And now all of a sudden, you're seeing this huge amount of money. So I think progress is being made. I think ensuring the money gets spent well is important. I truly believe in Uganda we do spend the money well, but I also know from experience that I haven't always said that about places I've been. That sometimes the money isn't spent so well. In Uganda, we're doing very good. So I just think accountability is important of how the money is being spent. But yeah, just that continued support, and the more money that can go into facilities, I think the better, really.
Do you see the Sekafa Cup